Ann Stoll received a Bachelor of Arts from UC Santa Barbara and a master's degree in anthropology from Cal State Fullerton. She has participated in more than a dozen major and many smaller archaeological projects. Previously, she enjoyed a professional career as a field director, writer, instructor, and lecturer, which sounds like a lot of work, in archaeology and anthropology, beginning in 1984. Anne joined the board of directors for ARARA this July, and she joined through our nominating process. We're an all-volunteer organization, and if you want to help, I'm sure we can find a place for you. Her husband, George, has a PhD and was a professor of chemical and materials engineering at California State Polytechnic University. I think that's what, Cal State Poly? In Pomona, and pursued an avid interest in outdoor photography for over 45 years. George has photo documented sites in the American West and around the world, most recently in Zimbabwe, Colombia, and Brazil. We look forward to seeing George's pictures and Anne's commentary tonight. Thank you for coming and participating.
Thank you, Troy. Thank you very much. My orientation slide here, my map of Brazil, just because, you know, people got to know where Brazil is. And I don't assume that you know that. And certainly when we first started going to Brazil, I had no idea that Rio de Janeiro and Sao Paulo were down on the south end of the country. A lot to learn about Brazil. It's an amazing country, huge. We have seen 129 sites now, photo documented that. Grab some water here. And I do want to thank the people of, generous people of Brazil. This is Felipe, who is attending today here. Felipe Cortes de Lima, who is our translator and guide. And thank you so much, Felipe, for everything. And I did talk about how there don't seem to be as many titles as there were. So maybe we're getting to some new material, though, I hope. People who go to Brazil need to visit this place. You're seeing this, right? Serra da Capivara, really the headquarters, if you will, the biggest, richest site in Brazil for people to see. They have 206 areas open for public visitation. Not an easy place to get to, but it can be done. But be sure you bring an English speaker with you, or you have some way to, well, deal with spoken Portuguese, because they have no English speaking guides there at this time. But they do have a wonderful new museum. This is the new museum, the Museum of Natural History, to show off their amazing collection of fossils, lots of megafauna that seem to have gravitated to the upland areas of Serra da Capivara at the end of the last Pleistocene dry-off. The interesting thing I want to mention is, to my knowledge, and this work I did on the homework, no evidence of megafauna have been found in an archaeological deposit as yet. So I'm trying to kind of give this rock art talk here an archaeological bend to it. And I'm still intrigued in the idea that people may very well have been in Brazil at the time. They overlapped perhaps with these animals, but they didn't kill them, or they didn't end up in a deposit. What we do have, of course, from these early days is this Nordeste tradition rock art. The Serra da Capivara style is considered to be the oldest. It's wonderful, 206 sites, as I say, panel after panel of wonderful little animated, dynamic red people running across the rock, doing various rituals and hunting, and some acrobats, and as I say, sex scenes. Here we go. This is for you, Lou. This is Serra da Capivara. But the message is, the early rock art here, this Nordeste rock art, is people related, lots of people, small people, several inches tall. And that apparently ends. That tradition of painting in that way ends rather abruptly, based on the archaeology that's been done there by the ladies and under Niedi Guidon at the Fumtam at about 6,000 years ago. What happened and where did they go? Or did they actually go? Is it just a matter of doing rock art a little differently? The most recent, the closest to that time rock art style is this, the Serra Branca style. It's people have changed a little bit, but it's still mostly people. I want to also point out the idea that agreste rock art, very different style, agreste. It's geometric. There aren't little people in it. Seems to be running alongside the Nordeste tradition at about the same time. And in fact, the Serra de Confusões, another huge area very close to Serra de Capivara, is exclusively agreste rock art. So people are making rock art, but the styles are changing. And the initial research out of Fumtam, this was published in 2014, is the out of Piauí hypothesis, the idea that everything started in Serra de Capivara and then left and went northeast and went south. And unfortunately, what's really difficult about this is there's no way to radiocarbon test this. We haven't got a good way to date the pigment as yet. Maybe Shumla, if this is working with Karen, and we're going to listen to Karen's talk next week on her radiocarbon of pigments, this is something that really will make a difference in Brazil as well. But we're gonna go and see, at least stylistically, if there's some way to connect them. I want to also present what I consider to be the most intelligent hypothesis about the peopling of Brazil, which is from a paper that was given at the SAAs in Florida in 2016 and subsequently published in 2018. This is a 4-phase idea about people in the northeast of Brazil, beginning with 13,000 years ago. However, the authors instantly tell you, yes, it could very well be much older than that, but our deposits begin with 13,000 years ago. And this whole scheme here is tied to good carbon-14 dates of hearths and deposits. So we have people, but we don't have rock art. Phase 2, we begin to get an extraordinary demographic increase, lots of sites that are dated to this period, 11,000 to about 9,000 years ago. Maybe a little bit of engraving on the rock, but no paint, no painted rock art at this period. But we do have lots of sites in Serra da Capivara and in the Cavernas de Piruaçu that I'm going to show you a little later in this talk. And a new kind of artifact shows up, this groundstone hand axe. Phase 3, though, is the important one for the Nordeste and the painted art. Some interesting changes. There are burials now that are datable and found in rock shelters that have Nordeste art on the walls. And there are dated deposits at Serra da Capivara and Cavernas de Piruaçu. I'm going to show you, there's an engraved rock that's framed on either side, kind of in a hearth sandwich of radiocarbon dated material that's really makes this look solid for 9,000 years, the beginning of Nordeste rock art. And then after 7,000 BP, we find something that I just recently read. It occurs also in the southwest of this country, an aggregation. We find people coming together in what they're calling gravity centers, or aggregations of sites, and some apparent abandonment of other sites. So another big shift at about 7,000. And we will have more to say about that. But this is a good basic hypothesis strategy for understanding the prehistory of Brazil, this part. So we're going to go down here to take a look at Carambos dos Dantas, because this is said to have been a clear descendant site. In other words, one of the ones that got the idea of rock art from Serra da Capivara and then moves out, the out of Piauí hypothesis. It's an interesting area. It's a kind of rugged. the sites are the four of them of the shike sites, which is a kind of cactus. You're seeing a little bit of cactus over there on the right. You climb up, but they've made an easy way to see the sites. And in 1982, Martin, one of the people from Serra da Capivara, did an intensive study here and saw great similarities in the figures. Lots of active, dynamic little red people that run across the screen and have rituals and do interesting things. So it did connect in her mind, and it makes sense to the Nordeste style. This are other examples of the Serdido style, or descendant Serdido style of Nordeste tradition. You've got something that I like to think of as a nuclear family there on the left, although I can't speak to the gender of these images actually. You see a little bit of the plain there out from the site, the Serdido drainage. And people, again, doing amazingly animated things, tackling animals, holding their arms up as they did in the last, a lot of the last phases at Serra da Capivara, dancing around a circle in some way. And here, by the way, Dave, this is for you, a capture hand, huh? Who knows? But they're interesting to be that they're hook-headed. So they have their own little interesting tweak on Nordeste tradition. You have the figure on the right here. I'm hoping you can see this. I can't see it, but I know she's there, or the figure is there with a triangular dress and long hair. I'm using D-stretch because the pigment has soaked into the rock so much, it's kind of washed out looking, but you can see they're hook heads, and they've got their arms up. They've got these bags on their arms. And this is drawings that Martine published with her report of this, maybe a female figure, but a figure anyway, in a kind of a tunic or a dress-like thing with long hair, raising a stick. So this is typical of the shike sites. Little people, but different little people. Another marker of Serdido style are the boats. This on the left is one of her drawings. These are some of the pictographs enhanced from the sites in this area. Definitely boats, and conceivably people with cargo from boats. This guy on below. Also, Martine has included more of the nuclear family, two figures with a little person in between. And a lot of other interesting images on this drawing that shows you active people, the cookie cutter people, or daisy chain people, if you prefer, the boats, and who knows what else they're doing, right? This is the cabeça de caju, as they say in Portuguese, or cashew head people. And they're truly C-shaped heads. They don't have the, sometimes with D-stretch, you could see a vestigial pigment that's maybe weathered away, but that doesn't seem to be the case with these hook heads. They're just hook heads. Styles, the style is also spread across panels that show the animation, the idea of people sort of dominating the images, to bird-headed people on the right with the infant between them, or small person between them. We have, looks to me like an archer that is shooting at maybe at a beehive. Always a lot of action and interesting action. I think that's what's made Nordeste descent rock art so popular, is that it's got a lot of interesting things going on that people like to speculate about. And here's another one at Shike 1. Is this in fact perhaps some kind of competition? It seems as though the Saturday Night Fever people are dancing on the left with holding on something round, and then the lined up people are on the other side of a line that seems to divide them down the middle. Typical of the Serdido style, shike. This isn't also part of that complex, a different site nearby town, Parejas, this is what the shelters look like from outside. And we think we probably introduced de-stretch to the area because when our guides showed us the panel on the left, they had never seen any of this before
Wow.
de-stretch showed these incredible figures running along, matching each other. And I'm particularly interested in this panel here, which I understand it's vertical, but I rotated it a little bit just to have a closer look. It seemed okay. So if we like the idea that people with their arms raised with like a baton or a stick are conceivably in sort of a warrior pose, nevertheless, the feet to me don't seem like that. But you do have a group of people maybe marching or behaving in a way to make them identical. So moving in an identical manner. This is typical also of this style of rock art. Unfortunately, this has kind of a sad end. At Perel House at Mirador, they found in this hole that you can see in here, several children buried with beads. And apparently from some of this, from something here, I've tried to get this report. I've gotten 2 little short summaries and I have never seen the full report. The children were dated, or some part of this was dated to 9,410 years ago, which would make it very old and in a different category almost, certainly not descendant. But after they left the field and put the children back in the grave, the site was pot hunted and thus the project was abandoned. So we have to step aside from Carnaval dos Estantes in the area. But what I'm finding intriguing is that this site, Lajedo de Soledad, is relatively close. I mean, okay, maybe over 100 miles away, but if you're thinking as perhaps like a prehistoric person might, it's just on the drainage to the west, a completely different kind of rock art. This is Lajedo de Soledad. It's a karstic limestone field that's seriously eroded during the rainy season, just fills with water. And shelters are up underneath these overhangs, and there are something like 8 loci that we saw there. And the rock art is totally different, as you can see down here, strictly geometric, dots, lines. The only representational ones we saw was this guy, this panel. It's called the macaw panel. And I'm going to de-stretch this so you can see 3 macaws here, maybe 4th. And also a lot of the positive handprints where you've got the palm painted and then you score it and then you press it on the ceiling of the shelter. So the trend, the impulse to paint the same, but what they ended up painting totally different. And we unfortunately have no dates that I know of for this site, but it's the parallelism of Agreste and Nordeste rock art is intriguing to me. We have lizards on the ceiling with a little bit of representational art. The lizards are everywhere, but the bulk of the site is these dot patterns, squares, circles, intriguing, interesting, bright, nothing like Nordeste rock art. So that with those 2 guys thinking about that, we're moving down to the Morro do Chapéu area. Morro do Chapéu is another one of these uplifted areas with a high plateau that is lovely and cool, and so therefore very popular, like Serra da Capivara, which is here in the upper left, and is a rich region for rock art. Within that red circle, there are lots of sites, and we've seen about 30 sites in the area. Here's Morro do Chapéu makes a nice little headquarters for everything. I'm only going to show you the art in the yellow circles here, but there are lots of sites to see. Oh, and one other thing to point out, this black line here marks the edge of the escarpment. It's a very sharp drop off and very distinct. So this is Morro de Chapelle, little town. We stayed there a bunch of times, and nice and cool. And it deserves its reputation. We visited sites here that are in a sandstone, a really eroded sandstone that are not too far from town. This is the plan view. This is Goa, which is a lagoon. So the sites are clustered around this area here. And we explored this several times. This is Philippe with me, standing next to the old woman for whom this is named, the Old Woman's Lagoon. This is supposed to be an image which is taken to be a figure, if you look at it just right, I guess. So this Lagoa does fill. It never has been full when we've been there, but it does fill up on occasion, a rather shallow one. So you can easily imagine the sites around it. It's always looked like this, dried up when we get there. But this limestone is eaten away at the base, which makes lovely rock shelters. And there are quite a few.
Sandstone.
What did I say? It's sandstone, yes. And this is the Lagoa del Veja sandstone at the top that has a wonderful view from here. Interesting rock art in Lagoa del Veja 1 and all of them. But note here, the bottom layer seems to be a kind of a marine animal, kind of a fish-like thing that's been modified with an arm, excuse me, and its fins have been made into two legs. That image is clearly on the bottom. I call it kind of a cone head later on. You'll see what I mean by that. And on top of this, thanks to D-Stretch, we can see crazy full face figures, full front on figures that are very much like the Serra Branca style art from Serra da Capivara, which I'm going to show you here. So the panels have at least two, if not three. You have the red zigzags that go across, but underneath we have yellow. And with D-Stretch, you can see this is the very similar to the Serra Branca style, if we're going to go on looks like, which is pretty much all we have here. Serra Branca style, horizontal, rectangular, spiky hair, arms up, legs splayed figure. So perhaps this is again a descendant of this that's at Serra da Capivara. We have also these little guys with bags. Interesting. More of the Serra Branca-like figures at Lagoa del Veja. They're yellow here, so it's hard to see without D-Stretch. Thank you again, John Harmon. There are other aspects of the art here also seem reminiscent of Nordeste style. The deer, which are common in Nordeste, and the animation of a leaping deer. We have a very animated little bird in the lower right. And this therianthropic figure here. And then we have the conehead fish leg things that are on top. So at least two, maybe three episodes of rock art. When you turn these orange yellow figures black with D-Stretch, you can see again hunters, small animated figures running. They're chasing, in this case, a rhea or an emu, which is a common animal. It's still alive in Brazil, by the way, and deer. So hunting scenes, not geometric, a lot more like Nordeste. While we were there, and we tended to go in September, which is the early spring, we walked up to a lovely site, the Toca de Popino, and it was spring. You can see some of the flowers. Our trusty guides, Sabia again, our driver. To another site, Toca de Pepino. Used to be a habitation. Somebody had been living in it not too long ago. I think they knocked down the walls fairly recently here. Some amazing tiny little miniature figures Miniature is also something that we see in Serra da Capivara and not many other places. So this is distinctive. Toca de Popino, a hunting scene, it seems. And this image, which I consider to be one of the most beautiful in all of Brazil, on the left, out of camera, and 2D stretches for the detail, you have a figure that I'm inclined to call female, but it lacks most of the gender requirements for that, has a bird on its head. That is a bird up there, and a cage on its back, kind of like the cargo people from Carnaubos, perhaps. And I'm not sure what is on the end of its stick, but you notice in this D-stretch on the right, perhaps, that you can see just the hint of eyes and a mouth, which is unusual. Amazing figure. But many other fine-lined paintings in this cave that tiny, thin lines for legs. And here's the emo with two heads here. I guess maybe indicating movement, perhaps. And this intriguing figure with the scaffolding that it's jumping off of. There may be some good ethnography in the area about this in a much more recent version of it. And it reminds me of the things you see in the Southwest as well. Had to de-stretch it to see if the person is connected. Does not appear to be to the top of that scaffold. So perhaps it just took a dive. We have this remarkable panel that I'm inclined to, the temptation is to see this as somehow a confrontation, because you have the cone-headed people with something in their arms raised. But on the other hand, it looks a little like a dance move to me. So I'll let that leave you, make your own minds up. However, this panel, the two from Toca de Pepino and one from nearby Palmyra site, these do have the appearance of an arm display. And I'm hoping you can look at this closely enough to see people with slings. They're throwing kind of a ballista here. They have paddles, they have spears, they have their legs are stretched out this way as if they're running at full tilt. So we have a lot of animation here and something that does look like perhaps an armed confrontation. But this is rare. It really is rare and intriguing too. So we leave the immediate vicinity of Mont de Chapeau and go to, not that far away, maybe 45-minute drive, to a completely different rock art style again. This is Toca do Cosmo. It's a big limestone sinkhole. You might even miss it unless they took you right to it. Here's George. George is up above and Philippe and I are down below. And we're looking again at non-representational rock art, red images above George's head on the ceiling, rayed discs, and there are a couple of other sites with rayed discs, but there are no people in this. There are no people depicted in these sites in this rock art style at all. Lines, concentrations of lines, intriguing shapes, but no people. We do get a lizard now and then. We have this lizard, but they're telling us when we ask that this is Agreste style. So once again, another example of Nordeste and Agreste, not too far away, people who have an impulse to make art, but very different styles. We leave this northeast part and following the great river San Francisco, amazing body of water, formerly navigable. A lot of really interesting archaeology done there as these different hydroelectric dams were built along. There are lots of dams on this river now. There's no chance to navigate it anymore, but you have a lot of rock art and some nice museums. And this is a small area of rock art. This is fairly recently. This now would be considered San Francisco rock art. And it's tiny little shelters, a one-person shelter or maybe a two-person shelter along a drainage that would have once been on the main river. And we have red, we have lizards and frogs and patterns. And this would be consistent with San Francisco rock art, which seems more related to Agreste to me. But look at this, boats. And the boats, an awful lot like the boats we saw in Carnavos dos Tantas in the Cerdido region. I beg to say almost identical in style. But there are other ingredients as well, birds, lots of birds in the Rio San Francisco style, bird feet, bird animals to see. And then from this point, we will go to probably the second most important site that we saw near the town of Januaria. It's on the highlands of, remember that the drainage is up here, heading north, not south, the way we would think of it, to the Cavernas do Piruaçu. It was a new park for us. You can see that it's on the Rio San Francisco here, though Piruaçu is the name of a river too. It's on the northern tip of Minas Gerais state, and was something of a long drive to get there, but it is worth every bit of it. You'll note that also that the nearest community to it is this Januaria, which is not really very close to the park. So we stayed closer to the park at this Posada. Now, I didn't like it very much at first. I know George is laughing. I actually tried to get us to leave because of this character in the middle, who the beds were fine, the food was fine, the people were great. And this, by the way, is our vehicle up here that we took, and it loved it. But these characters don't like to sleep in the morning, and I do sometimes. So we kind of worked it out and went to this amazing park, Cavernas de Piruaçu, which is a destination for cavers. There are 10 different caves open to people, and you put on your hard hat and you go down and you can spend hours. They're huge, huge caves. I have to tell you that I never even went because everything I wanted to see was on the outside. And perhaps the most important of all the sites so far that we've seen in Cavernas de Piruaçu is this one. This is La do Boquete. Doesn't look like much from the outside, but they did an amazing excavation here back in the 1980s, and they've managed to put some meat onto some of these ideas about the ages by taking this all the way down to bedrock and then following the human remains, the archaeological deposits, which they dated with carbon-14 dating. Here is the engraved rock, which was found neatly bracketed by dated hearths to a little under 7,000 years ago. And they have a number of other interesting characteristics in this site. Burials they found. This is the evidence for the burials that were found in the rock shelters, some of the pigment, some of the other items, but I want to concentrate on this character because he intrigued me. This is the image from the display that the park put together at the site. This guy, the artist, was found in the hole that you're seeing on the left, the excavation. He was found sitting upright and tied. If you'll note, his hands and his ankles are tied. Now, he was called the artist because of this container at his side that had paintbrushes and pigments and things like that in it. And they were able to get a good date on him, and they found the remains of the trichotomy bug, the one that spreads Chagas disease. Now, Chagas disease is a blood disease endemic in the tropics that does have, at its extreme, when it gets really going on you, an effect in the brain. So I'm wondering if conceivably the artist started to do some interesting behavior that entitled him to being tied when he was finally buried. They don't say that. They don't answer that question. But what they do share with us is several amazing sites. This is Lapadodoseños. This whole limestone cliff face has pigment in here and there, but some dense concentrations. And you can see they've given us lovely wooden walkways to see it. Unfortunately, wooden, but you can get pretty close to a lot of this. I'm going to show it to you close up. So they're making brilliant efforts to try to date this, at least in the absence of being able to date the pigment itself. The white pigment they believe is on top. So by a relative chronology of superpositioning, they see the white as the most recent and the little black and red guys as the most ancient. And on this panel of Lapadodoseños, now broken into two pieces to make it a little easier to see, you can see white on the top, white figures perhaps, and you might be able to see some white over here. But there are a couple of little black birds and this guy that are very much on the top. So I don't know if this strategy entirely works for this site. But this is then San Francisco rock art, kind of a mix, a lot of geometrics, some representational, again, nothing like Nordeste. Here is the second strategy for trying to date this material. I find this one really intriguing too. The cassava plant is native to South Central Brazil, and you use the cassava root, these are the roots here, and you pound those and you rinse them out and you can make manioc. And this is a staple of the indigenous people. Interestingly, like the acorn, you have to wash out the tannins. It's poisonous if you don't. Intriguing that these second choice foods become the staple. These are thought to be depictions of cassava roots, like here. Okay. And this is from Lapadodoseño, the cassava plant. You've got the leaves, a nice pinnate leaf here. You have little flower parts here. But what's even more intriguing is, to me, is the maize here. 5 corn plants. Now, we know that maize was domesticated approximately 10,000 years ago. So it's taken a while to get to Brazil, if this is the case, if this panel really does date to 2500 BP. But it might be explained by the fact that maize is said to have arrived in Brazil on 2 different waves, one at 6,000 and one at 2,000 BP. So that seems to be a pretty solid way, in the absence of better means, for dating this panel. And the sites have very this one that you can't see it too well in this shot, but I did want to show this, what looks to me like to be a very rich human habitation out in front of this very deep cave. Fortunately, they've routed the walkway away from it to keep it from being damaged. But with the magic of telephoto lenses, you can get a little. You're seeing a lot of the white images on top, maybe a bottle gourd here for water carrying, since ceramics are not very common. And closer yet, white on top. These little guys we call chromosomes, just to be able to talk about them. Lots of shapes, not much that's identifiable, but some frogs, toads, amphibians that show up periodically, and very rich in the pigment. But last but not least, the cave that really blows people away, and the images that do, is this Abrigo de Caboclo, this whole area. is vibrantly painted. And you can see when you approach the site, it's quite open. And of course, they've kept the vegetation away from it. But it's exposed in this way so that you can really get a feeling how rich the site is. And these are some of the paint that's on this wall. Lozenges, kind of like a cartouche, perhaps. Very little representational art here. This is a natural color, though it may be on the verge of fading. I think I'll show you why I think that. This is a drawing of it from 1997, and Schobiger was able to see this figure here somehow. When you see it today, it's faded enough that it's very difficult to see this little red figure. But with D-stretch, you can see him crawling out of this fish. It seems a one-legged person climbing out of a fish, but still, most of this is just brilliantly colored lozenge, cartouche type shapes. And this one too. Sort of a human figure, no feet, no faces, no eyes, none of those features. Red on top, and I guess King Kong here on the left below, de-stretched to give you a little emphasis. This is on the right part of that one main panel at Caboclo. There are some representational images, not very many, a few which I've collected here. We've got a nice little armadillo in the lower portion. And now, my friends, I'm going to stop and remind you that this is only this is the end of the talk. And thank you.
Thank you, Anne. That was great. I know a lot of us are really jealous that you've been able to travel as much as you have and see so many of these great sites. I was particularly taken with the Tocopino site with the little tiny figures. Those just, I thought, were incredible.
They are remarkable.
We did have a few questions that came in. Just wanted to see your thoughts. First off, a couple people mentioned the image that seemed to show a person falling or jumping from some scaffolding. They both suggested that it was possibly, instead of scaffolding, that it was a net being shown in side view and that it was some sort of hunting scene. I don't know if that conforms to what you've seen or if anyone had any idea, but again, a couple people thought that when they saw that image.
I'm not sure that I could say I've seen a lot of nets.
But that scaffolding occurs more.
A scaffold sort of structure. A structure does acrobatic events are shown more in Serra da Capivara of people who do seem to be scaling things and jumping. So that seems to be a little more common, but it could have been a net. I agree, could be.
Okay. And I was just curious, you showed several images of boats. And do you know, is there any equivalent of that style of boats, either found in the archaeological record or the historic record, that they could match those images with?
Not that I've been able to find. I would be keen to hear about it if that's the case.
Sure. I just wondered if other researchers had done that work. So
it seems like an obvious question, doesn't it? You'd think there would be at least the trace of a boat, but not that I've been able to find. As I say, I consider that there's an obstacle to some of the research in that it is hard to get it into English, but I have not heard of anything.
Sure. And just speaking of publications, is there a definitive Brazilian rock art publication, or where would you direct people who would want to know more about this?
I would direct them to Lee Merrimore's database, because he's got an awful lot of good citations there. And then you're going to have to find on JSTOR and various other places. Some things do show up in our ARARA and SAA publications. There are a couple of important books, but for technical reports, if Dito Morales is here, I would love to hear this. I know we have experts on Brazilian rock art in ARARA, and I would love to know the answer to that myself. The things I've been able to find have been hunting down specific citations on JSTOR and other such programs.
Right.
These are the three. But there are three books that this is the guide you can buy at the park, Serra de Capybara, which is outstanding. It's an outstanding book.
This guy has English.
It has English and Portuguese.
English on one side, Portuguese on the other. This is one of the big ones from Serra de Capybara and the folks at Fumtam. I don't know if you can see any of this. This is important, very important, but a little dated now. This is Pessis stuff from 2013. Andre Proust et al. So there've been some big, beautiful publications. How to keep up with more recent article type stuff. I haven't got a good source. I wish I did.
Sure. Someone also pointed out a correction as far as you mentioned emus in the art, and they pointed out that emus live in Australia. Rheas live in South America. Again, they look very similar. Obvious mistake, but someone just wanted to point that out.
The Portuguese is Ema, E-M-A, so that's why I end up with it.
That makes it even more confusing, definitely.
Yeah, it does. And we did see one.
Nice.
So they're still there.
And someone else was asking if the different styles, all within such a close distance, does that represent insular groups or more temporal differentiation between them?
I'm thinking insular groups. That's my guess on this. As I say, as we get more dating, I think we'll find more answers to that, be able to refine that. But my feeling is that there's a period of time when everybody's making rock art. Now they're differentiating themselves from each other by doing a different style, but it's temporally similar. That's my theory.
And someone else was mentioning so many beautiful painted images. So there's a lot of pigment being represented. Has anyone done the work to source where those minerals come from, where the pigments come from?
I saw one for the Central area that which is near Morro do Chapéu, which sourced it to very close by, and also tied it with some ceramic studies. I'm not sure it was conclusive. To my knowledge, there's no greater stuff. I'm thinking that COVID and government changes may have slowed down a lot of this. I hope that's not the case. Maybe it's just my ignorance, but no, I don't know of that.
And I was curious, you mentioned engravings in the phase 2 period, 11 to 9,000 years ago. What sort of imagery do you get in engravings? How does it differ than the painted images?
You know, they occur at the caverns.
Cavernas has some engravings. The ones that are mentioned for really the early date are just lines. I mean, they're not representational. But of course, you have Inga rock that is an amazing petroglyph. We should have the wonderful 3D version of it that Evelyn and Bob Mark have made, because it's kind of unique. Well, it is unique, but I mean, it's unusual. It's one gigantic petroglyph area of lines and circles, and then no more petroglyphs around there. They're very rare. It's extraordinary how rare they are.
Interesting.
And non-representational in style, to my knowledge.
All right. Well, that's good. The list of questions that came through. I think otherwise people just said, thank you very much. It was wonderful. Everyone enjoyed it. So
Thank you.
again, we really appreciate it. Thank you for sharing. Gives us lots to think about.
Thank you for listening.
All right. And we are taking next month off from this lecture series, but we will be back in November, where we will have Matthew Podinsky talking about site signage and reducing depreciative behaviors at rock art sites. So hope to see you all in November. Thank you very much.